Major update today, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau plans to invoke the Emergencies Act in response to protests. This act grants the cabinet the ability to take, quote, special temporary measures that may not be appropriate in normal times. Meanwhile, Canadian state media, which is funded by Trudeau and his Liberal Party, have been completely ratioed on Twitter today after they claimed that the word freedom was problematic. A headline from CBC says why the word freedom is such a useful rallying cry for protesters. The word has become common among far-right groups, experts say. Again, even the majority of the people who actually follow the CBC found this headline ridiculous. One of the top comments says, "Never thought I'd say this, but I guess I'm on team defund the CBC. Propagandizing the word freedom is gross." More on this latest update. They say Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has told his caucus he will invoke the never-before-used Emergencies Act to give the federal government extra powers to handle anti-mandate protests against the country. Those sources who were not authorized to speak publicly said the Prime Minister informed the premiers of his decision this morning. The Emergencies Act, which replaced the War Measures Act in the 1980s, defines a national emergency as a temporary, quote, urgent and critical situation that seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians and is of such proportions or nature as to exceed the capacity or authority of a province to deal with it. It gives special powers to the Prime Minister to respond to emergency scenarios affecting public welfare, including natural disasters and disease outbreaks, public order, civil unrest, and international emergencies or war emergencies. Meanwhile, as the Prime Minister continues to try labeling those who oppose him as part of a fringe minority, even mainstream polls are now admitting that Trudeau's approval has plummeted over the last 2 weeks, even among former supporters of Trudeau. According to a survey taken on February 10th, only 16% of Canadians said that they would vote for Trudeau based on how he has handled the protests. The mainstream media are also continuing to actively work against the protesters. Another update says the crowdfunding site for the Canadian Freedom Convoy was disabled in a possible hack. The Daily Mail says, meanwhile, hackers knocked the fundraising site GiveSendGo offline in an attack targeting a campaign that raised at least $8.6 million to support the Freedom Convoy demonstrations. The attack on Sunday night redirected visitors to a taunting video from the Disney film Frozen and a message slamming the Freedom Convoy as an insurrection led by known extremists. The unidentified hackers claim to have stolen the list of donors who contributed to the campaign and provided the information to a third-party website, which is now offering to share it with journalists and researchers. Legacy media propagandists like CTV anchor Graham Richardson have been continuing to antagonize and smear convoy protesters while inciting counter-protesters, saying that they are just good people who have had enough. Of course, they and the rest of the mainstream Canadian media ignored the actual violence that occurred last week in Winnipeg. A far-left Antifa militant who had previously been accused of committing crimes against a 13-year-old girl had rammed into 4 people with his car at a Freedom Convoy mandate protest. Again, this story and its connection to Antifa was completely ignored by mainstream Canadian news sources after they had just spent weeks attacking convoy supporters. However, some news outlets in the US and other places around the world did report on the connection. Here's an article from the New York Post where they point out that on the suspect's Facebook page, a song from 7 years ago is titled Bash the Fash. Also on his Facebook, he mocked anti-mandate protesters, and in one post back from November of 2020, he wrote, "I don't know why folk are hating on masks. I love mine." More info from the National Post They say the Emergencies Act replaced the War Measures Act in 1988 and is more limited in what it can do, including requiring parliamentary oversight. All measures invoked under the Emergencies Act must also comply with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. According to the CBC, Ottawa had no plans to send in the military. After his announcement earlier today, Ontario Premier Doug Ford was asked about this, responding, quote, "I'm not too sure what the Prime Minister is going to discuss with us, but I will tell you I'll support the federal government and any proposals they have to bring law and order back to our province." Once again, regardless of what happens going forward, the last 2 weeks have been a total disaster for Trudeau and his poll numbers. A mainstream pollster telling the National Post that based on these numbers, he thinks that this could cost Trudeau his job. And we can close this video looking at this ridiculous article from the taxpayer-funded CBC with their headline, "Why the word freedom is such a useful rallying cry for protesters. The word has become common among far-right groups, experts say." Here is the author of this article, Jason Vermes. His Twitter page says that he is the senior writer for CBC Day 6 and Checkup CBC. At the beginning of the article, he says, often associated with protests and rallies in the United States, the term has taken hold among protesters who are part of the Freedom Convoy, which rolled into Ottawa in late January and has become entrenched in the city's downtown. For many, freedom is a malleable term, one that's open to interpretation. That flexibility in part has fueled its growth among certain groups, said Barbara Perry, director of the Center of Hate, Bias, and Extremism at the Oshawa-based Ontario Tech University. Quote, "It is a term that has resonated. You can define it and understand it and sort of manipulate it in a way that makes sense to you and is useful to you, depending on your perspective. It is also a term that has thrived among far-right groups," said Perry, one of a number of experts who say the presence of far-right groups in Canada is growing. I'm sure many watching will not be surprised to hear that Barbara Perry, this so-called expert who claims that the word freedom is now suddenly a sign of being part of the far right, is the expert that was chosen by Facebook to help their global network counter a rise in online hate. Barbara Perry had also regularly attacked President Donald Trump. Now Facebook has given her group over $500,000 to help her censor content that she finds problematic. On her bio, Barbara Perry calls herself a well-known expert among media outlets including The Agenda, CBC, The Current, The Globe and Mail, and The New York Times. Again, the CBC was completely ratioed on Twitter after posting this article. The article got just over 700 likes and is currently at almost 5,000 comments criticizing the CBC. Someone responding, "This is the most Orwellian thing I've seen today." So a few more of these top comments. One here says, as CBC News points out, the word freedom is a far-right fascist dog whistle. The only way to protect our freedom is to arrest anyone who talks about it. Someone else sharing the article saying, CBC finds another word Canadians should think twice about using, freedom. The word has become common among far-right groups, experts say. So one more commenter saying, years ago I said that journalists needed to stop saying scientists say and instead name the one or two people they actually talked to. I didn't see just how ridiculously that phenomenon would expand. Please leave a comment and tell me what you think about this latest update. If you could give this video a thumbs up, remember to click the like button, that's greatly appreciated, and make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. Also, with the increasing censorship at YouTube, I'll remind everyone it's probably a good idea to find me on some alternative platforms as well. One place where you can find me is superu.net. That's super, the letter U.net. If you search for Kip Simpson over there, you can also find me at Odyssey.com. And as usual, thank you very much, everyone who has been supporting this channel with your donations over at Patreon or PayPal, and with your super chats as well. There's also now a tip option over at SuperU. You can find either of those links down in the video description, where you can support this channel directly. Even just a few dollars makes a huge difference and helps me keep talking about these important issues. Patreon.com/realityreader or paypal.me/realityreader. I will follow up soon. Thanks again.